My name is Isabel Mace. I'm 34 years old, born in Kansas, raised on systems, codes, and silence. I serve as a senior cyber operations officer for the United States Air Force. On paper, I manage encryption integrity. In reality, I've spent the last decade intercepting digital threats before they ever reached a physical form. Wars that ended in databases, not deserts. No medals, no funerals. Just zeros, ones, and choices I had to live with. And yet, to my older sister, Colonel Erica Mace, I'm just a keyboard warrior. She said it out loud as we boarded the military flight to Stuttgart that morning. Said it with her full voice, her laugh echoing through the cabin of the C-17, right in front of a dozen brass-collared officers. I heard it from the auxiliary seat by the equipment bay. Just a keyboard warrior, she chuckled, loud enough for everyone to hear. Let's hope the coffee machine doesn't need rebooting midair, huh? They laughed with her. Not because it was funny, because when a full-bird colonel makes a joke, you laugh. I didn't. I just smiled politely, nodded like I hadn't heard it before. Like it didn't come from the same mouth that once read me bedtime stories. Erica always knew how to draw the spotlight. She just never learned how to share it. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years before this flight. I was invited as technical support, a diplomatic gesture on a secure military transport with 48 high-value personnel en route to a global cybersecurity summit. Most of them didn't know my name, just that I was someone with a laptop and clearance. That's how I liked it, quiet, forgotten. I kept to myself, cargo bay, corner seat, no eye contact, earbuds in, watching encrypted comms flicker across my tablet screen. I didn't need the respect of that cabin. I didn't need their validation. Until the encryption appeared. Until the plane began to tremble, just slightly at first. Until the cabin lights flickered for exactly 1 second. And something inside me knew it wasn't turbulence. It was something worse. And then came the voice I hadn't heard in almost 4 years. Calm, grave. Live from command ops. Get me Oracle from the cargo bay, now. That wasn't a request. That was a code-level order, because Oracle wasn't my job title, it was my call sign. The one they erased when I was quietly transferred. The one no one on this plane should have known. But someone did. And they knew exactly when to use it. My sister's face, when she heard that word, was the last thing I saw before standing up. Blank, pale, speechless. She hadn't called me that since Syria. She never thought she'd hear it again. And she definitely didn't think it would be shouted over a military channel, right in front of everyone. I moved fast. Past the rows of officers who suddenly forgot how to breathe. Past Erica, who didn't stop me, didn't even speak. She knew. Somewhere inside, she knew what that name meant. The cockpit door opened before I reached it. Major Deller was already pale, sweat pooling at his collar. There's a timer, he said. We don't know where it came from. It bypassed our primary auth. I stepped in without asking permission. On the screen it was already there, black background, green numbers. Bolero 1957 counting down. No origin signal, no trace, no source. Just a digital ghost gripping the aircraft's nervous system. I looked closer. This wasn't a virus. This was something else. It had mimicked the plane's internal BIOS. It was broadcasting a false telemetry signal to a shadow IP, rerouting the aircraft mid-air while making the tower believe we were still on track. A reroute disguised as normal flight path telemetry. No one on board could see it, not even the pilots, unless they knew what to look for, unless they spoke my language. That's why Redfield had called for Oracle. The encryption wasn't just unbreakable to them, it was familiar to me. Because the structure, however distorted, had pieces of my old code in it. Someone had learned from my work, used it against the very protocols I once created. And now 48 lives, including the one who mocked me an hour ago, depended on whether or not I could undo it. I pulled the portable drive from my pocket, slid it into the auxiliary input beside the avionics panel. My fingers hovered over the screen for just a second. The code was evolving, it was recursive, adaptive. But it was still built on architecture I knew, because I built it once, years ago, back when they still trusted me. I launched my interface, a stripped-down decryption shell I wrote for emergencies. No frills, just logic, 10 lines. That's all it would take. The first line neutralized the time lock kernel. The second line located the embedded control signal. The third severed its handshake with external servers. Lines 4 through 6 ran false output protocols, feeding stable flight data back to the system, ensuring no override reboot. Line 7 tricked the BIOS into accepting its default map. Line 8 rerouted the false telemetry to a secure sandbox. Line 9 locked the hijack attempt into a loop, and Line 10, just one word, sleep. The timer stopped at 00:03:07. The screens normalized. The pilot blinked. The major exhaled. No one spoke. Until the co-pilot whispered, "What the hell did she just do?" Erica stood outside the cockpit door, watching through the tiny glass window. For the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. I didn't need her praise. I didn't need anyone's. The only thing I needed was to finish the job. Because I had questions, and someone on board had just told the world who I used to be. That wasn't an accident. It was a signal. And I just answered it. When I joined Counterintelligence Tech Unit 4, I didn't enter through the front gate. I came in through a side door, cleared quietly, trained in silence, embedded with protocols most officers didn't even know existed. My work wasn't loud, it wasn't decorated, but it mattered. I didn't serve for attention. I served to keep attention from ever being needed. For 3 years, I designed firewall systems for covert missions. Not commercial-grade barriers, but true military frameworks that could absorb foreign intelligence strikes without ever alerting the target. I saw the battlefield through packet data, exploit chains, and zero-day triggers. I could tell you more about an enemy's thinking from one intercepted keystroke than from a week's worth of satellite footage. I was promoted twice. I never asked for it. My sister Erica was already a star. High-profile operations, NATO-level briefings, media-approved heroism. Her world was one of flashbulbs and flak jackets. Mine was cipher blocks and kill switches. Different languages, same war. Then the breach happened. A routine sweep flagged a corruption in a low-priority archive. At first, it looked like a glitch. But when the log was cross-checked, it pointed directly at my credentials. Someone had used my access key, my digital fingerprint, to remove flagged metadata from a secure archive. Information that had been tagged for future audit simply disappeared. Clean, untraceable, or so they thought. The investigation was immediate. No press, no hearings. Just a sealed room with 5 men and 1 accusation. They said I'd tampered with classified data to protect an operative I'd previously worked with. I asked for evidence. They said the logs spoke for themselves. When I asked who found the log discrepancy, the answer was a single name. Colonel Erica Mace. My sister. She had reported the initial anomaly that triggered the entire investigation. She had flagged my clearance for audit. And when they asked her to confirm whether I had ever spoken of off-grid operations, she said yes. The report included her signature. I never confronted her. Not then. There was nothing to say that wouldn't cost me more. They didn't court-martial me. The evidence wasn't strong enough. But they revoked my special clearance. My projects were reassigned. I was transferred out quietly. My name was no longer whispered in operations. It wasn't mentioned at all. I submitted my resignation the following week. 2 days later, I received a plain envelope on my bunk. No name, no return address. Inside was a folded sheet of paper with 1 sentence. They wanted a fall. She gave them a sister. No signature. I packed my bags and left the next morning. Somewhere between Langley and nowhere, I found a post at a remote base in Alaska, signal control, 3rd shift. It wasn't glamorous, but I didn't care. I wasn't chasing titles. I just wanted silence. I started again, with no rank, no noise, no war, until that flight. Until my name, my real name, was called again, Oracle. And the only person who looked more stunned than I was my sister. She knew what she'd buried. She just never expected it to claw its way back to the surface, especially not 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, especially not in front of the very people she'd once convinced to erase me. 2 years after I left Langley, after I buried my title and stopped answering to the name Oracle, a letter showed up at my post in Alaska. It wasn't official mail, no government markings, just my name typed neatly on the front of a white envelope. Inside was a flight itinerary, military charter, destination Stuttgart, Germany. Attached was a personal note. This summit is important. High Command will be there. It's a good opportunity for you to step forward again. I made sure your name was on the list. See you on board. It was signed, Erica. No apology, no explanation. Just that tone, casual, efficient, like she was doing me a favor. For 2 hours, I stared at that note. 2 years, 2 years of silence, 2 years of pretending I didn't see her name in internal memos, 2 years of being forgotten by design. And now she wanted me back. Not to dinner, not to a funeral, but to a plane full of high-ranking officers where she'd be center stage, and I'd be the technical footnote in a clean uniform. I wasn't naive. I knew the subtext. This was politics. Some reshuffling of image. A chess move on her part. Get her sister, the former oracle, seen again in a non-threatening light. Make it look like reconciliation, progress, control the narrative. But I didn't tear the note up. I packed. Not for redemption, for truth. I needed to see her face again. I needed to hear her voice when she looked me in the eye. I needed to feel the air around her and know finally whether she'd done it out of fear or malice, or both. The military transport was scheduled to depart from Andrews Air Force Base. I arrived early, no escort, no flags. Just a worn duffel bag and the cold inside my chest that hadn't warmed in years. When I stepped onto the tarmac, I saw her. She was standing near the front ramp of the C-17, speaking to a brigadier about itinerary logistics. Perfect posture, confident stance. The golden child still unshaken. When she caught sight of me, something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe regret, but not shame. She didn't approach, just nodded, like this was any other boarding. As if the last 2 years were a pause, not a fracture. They loaded us in by rank and assignment. She went to the forward seating, the cluster reserved for command staff. I was directed to Auxiliary Station 4, Cargo Bay, left side, tech support, no salute, no handshake. My name wasn't on the lips of anyone who mattered. It was easier that way. I settled into the metal bench, pulled out my tablet, and began scanning the onboard systems out of habit. Not my job, but it gave my hands something to do. Something honest. As the engines whined to life, I looked out at the horizon beyond the hangar. I wasn't here to fix anything. I was here to remember who broke it, and maybe, if the moment came, to return the favor. But not out of revenge, out of necessity. Because sometimes the only way to clean the rot is to reopen the wound. Let it bleed, let it speak, let it show you exactly how deep it goes. And that flight, 35,000 feet above everything I had tried to bury, was where it finally began. They didn't need to say anything. The uniforms did the talking. From the moment I stepped onto that plane, I could feel it. Those sideways glances, the calculated dismissals, the passive rank-based avoidance. Everyone knew each other. Everyone belonged to someone's chain of command. Except me. I was listed as support tech, auxiliary, unassigned to any specific officer or mission cell. That kind of label didn't inspire curiosity, it signaled irrelevance. A convenient body to run diagnostics or reboot the backup node if someone kicked the power strip loose. Invisible until summoned. I took my seat near the aft panel station, where the air buzzed from the avionics deck beneath. It was loud enough to drown out small talk. Not that anyone had offered me any. Across from me sat a full colonel from cyber logistics. Nameplate polished, medals perfectly spaced. He glanced up when I opened my tablet, then immediately looked away, like proximity might somehow affect his clearance level. Others weren't as subtle. A captain whispered something to the major beside him. Both looked in my direction. The major chuckled. I didn't care. I'd seen that look before. Half suspicion, half dismissal. It came from people who were afraid of what they didn't understand and offended by those they couldn't control. And when it came to code, no one controlled me. No one except the systems I built. I leaned back, letting my eyes wander. There were 48 of us aboard. Most were mid to high command. Joint task force leaders, policy directors, analysts. All bound for a NATO cyber summit where they'd sip coffee over zero trust frameworks and buzzwords that sounded sharp in PowerPoints. They had no idea they were being escorted by someone who had once locked down an international breach with a homemade script and a borrowed satellite link. But that was the point. They weren't supposed to know. Still, there was one who noticed. A second lieutenant passed my row on his way toward the flight deck, probably fetching orders for his CO. Young, sharp, too green to be cynical, but not too naive to be blind. As he passed, he slowed for half a step, leaned slightly toward my bench, and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear it over the engine hum. "I read your case file once, in training. Oracle was a legend." Then he kept walking. I didn't react, not outwardly, but something in my chest pulled tight. I hadn't heard that name spoken with respect in years. Not without irony, not without the undertone of suspicion or ridicule. For a second, I wanted to stop him. Ask what they taught now. Ask what they thought had happened to her, to me. But I didn't. Because legends don't explain themselves. They vanish, or they fall. And depending on who you ask, I had done both. I glanced up again. Erica was seated near the front, laughing with two NATO advisors. Perfect posture. That signature voice, confident, crisp, never uncertain. She hadn't looked back once since we boarded. Maybe she thought I wouldn't last long enough to matter. Maybe she didn't care. Or maybe, deep down, she knew that someone like me, someone she thought she had erased, only stayed quiet when she chose to. And I hadn't chosen yet. We had been in the air for just over 3 hours when it started. Quiet at first. Subtle. The kind of change you'd miss if you weren't trained to notice patterns. I was scanning the flight interface for routine diagnostics. Not part of my job, at least not officially. But it had become a habit. Muscle memory born from a time when every second of lag could cost lives. Then I noticed the first break. The navigation panel flickered, once, then again. At first I thought it was turbulence, until I saw the cursor drift on the flight path. Just by a fraction of a degree, but it moved. And it wasn't correcting itself. I tapped the refresh. Nothing. The radar display went dark. For exactly 3 seconds, the entire flight system went blind. No satellite ping, no transponder bounce, no signal echo from tower control. I glanced up at the nearest crew screen. No one else noticed yet. The interface rebooted itself without alert. That was my second red flag. The system had initiated a shadow protocol, something embedded deep in the avionics that should have been disabled during pre-flight. Something that masked operational changes as routine resets. I sat up straighter. That wasn't turbulence. That wasn't a blip. That was a hijack attempt. But not the kind anyone on this flight was trained for. I opened my tablet, running a soft intrusion scan through the backup channel tethered to my own equipment. Within seconds, I had confirmation. Foreign code had injected itself into the plane's navigational BIOS. And it wasn't passive. It was rewriting instructions in real time, redirecting our altitude and trajectory while forging synthetic telemetry data for ground control. In simpler terms, the plane was being steered, and no one knew, except me. I kept my expression neutral, eyes flicking back and forth across the scrolling data. The code was unfamiliar, but the structure wasn't. It was modular, recursive, designed to learn, adapt, rewrite itself in motion. Then the timer appeared. Black box, green numerals, dead center of my screen. R 1758, I blinked. That wasn't a standard system display. That was custom. The timer had been encoded directly into the avionics, a countdown to an event I couldn't yet identify. It wasn't labeled as a detonation, no blast protocols, no fuse trees, but it was triggering automated changes at scheduled intervals. I leaned slightly to my left and watched the pilot's panel from a distance. The main interface looked normal. The synthetic signals were working. They thought we were still on course. We weren't. And the plane's onboard systems were locked out of manual override. I considered alerting the flight crew, right then, right there, but something stopped me. Because if this code was based on my own systems, and it was, it had been written to anticipate human reaction. The moment someone sounded the alarm, the failsafe would likely accelerate. I needed a better point of entry, one the system wouldn't expect. I unplugged my tablet, tucked it against my chest, and stood up. The moment I did, a low static noise crackled through the intercom. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. And then I heard it, his voice. Gravel, calm, unmistakable. General Redfield. Flight 217, this is Command 1. Initiate code black. Immediate authorization override. Identify Oracle. Repeat. Get me Oracle from the cargo bay, now. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. And for the second time in my life, my call sign had been spoken aloud on an open channel. The last time, I had saved an entire forward ops base from a data breach that would have collapsed 3 allied programs. This time, I was 35,000 feet in the air, surrounded by officers who thought I was the help. And my sister was seated 2 rows ahead, frozen. I didn't wait for permission. I stepped into the aisle, tablet in hand, boots steady beneath me. They moved aside, silent, unsure, watching the technician with the face they didn't recognize, but the name they suddenly remembered. I was no longer just Isabel Mace. I was Oracle again. And I had 17 minutes and 21 seconds to stop a plane from vanishing off the face of the earth. The cockpit turned frantic the moment the transmission ended. A storm of clipped voices, fingers flying across switches, pilots scanning blinking panels and emergency override manuals like prayers. The flight engineer started reading off protocols. Another officer tried to re-establish a comm link, but there was no signal. The plane had gone digitally dark. Then I heard her voice, sharp, commanding, unmistakably hers. Power cycle the primary system. Shut it all down. Reboot from cold. My sister, Colonel Erica Mace. Of course she would try to lead. Of course she'd speak first. She always did. Loud, decisive, immediate. To anyone else, this sounded like authority. To me, it sounded like panic disguised as control. And she was wrong. Dead wrong. Power cycling the system wouldn't flush the code. It would anchor it deeper. Whoever wrote that malware had designed it to survive hard reboots. It wasn't parasitic. It was native. It restructured the BIOS itself, wrapped itself in legitimate command trees. Restarting would trigger a defensive lockout. The system would enter ghost mode, pretending to comply while severing all contact. That kind of code didn't come from a textbook. It came from me, or someone who learned from me. I kept my mouth shut and stepped into the cockpit. No one stopped me now. Redfield's voice had done that already. The pilot, Major Deller, glanced at me, confused, skeptical, but desperate enough to step back. I dropped into the auxiliary seat, pulled out my encrypted drive, and slid it into the direct access port. The moment my system synced, the timer blinked faster. 0:14:46. I exhaled once, then began. My interface launched, a stripped, no-skin shell I'd built myself. It bypassed all graphic layers and opened the flight system in raw code. Every line was familiar. It mimicked my own style: recursive logic, dual-path execution, real-time variable substitution. But it was warped, tweaked, almost reverent. Someone had copied my method and refined it. Whoever this was, they weren't just hijacking a plane. They were sending a message, and that message had my signature all over it. Behind me, Erica stepped into the doorway. "What the hell is she doing?" she barked. "She's following my orders," Redfield said through the static. There was silence after that. The room quieted. Even the hum of the engines seemed to pull back. I focused. The malware had set an embedded handshake with an external relay, something disguised as an update channel. It was pulling command instructions every 10 seconds, each one redirecting our flight path by a fraction of a degree. Slow enough not to trigger physical deviation alarms, just enough to take us farther from any scheduled route. I flagged the relay channel and launched a dead echo loop, feeding back false acknowledgments to stall the next directive. The timer held at 0:13:12. Better, but not enough. I reached into my pack, pulled out a second device, a signal cloaker that could intercept the next 5 commands and reroute them to my sandbox server. That would buy me maybe 2 minutes of analysis time. "Oracle," Redfield said through the channel, his voice clearer now. "This wasn't a random breach." "I know," I replied quietly. "It's someone inside." He didn't argue, neither did Erica. I kept typing. My fingers moved without hesitation, muscle memory guiding them. Lines of code blurred into instinct. Every keystroke shaved off uncertainty. I didn't look up. Not when the second timer appeared. Not when the cloaker blinked red. Not even when the virus tried to shut me out by disabling my peripheral drivers. I had built firewalls inside firewalls. It wasn't perfect, but it held. Then the code tried something new. It greeted me, just one line, in plain text. "Welcome back, Oracle." I stared at the message for a second. That's when I realized. This wasn't an attack, it was a test. And I had just passed the first round. The moment I saw that message, "Welcome back, Oracle," I knew this wasn't just sabotage. It was personal, tactical, designed not just to threaten, but to draw me out. And I'd walked right into it. I cleared the screen, heart steady, fingers cold. I didn't respond. Whoever was on the other end didn't need a reply. My presence in the system was answer enough. I returned to the timer, 00:11:27. Still running. Still wired into a logic chain that was rewriting itself every 10 seconds. But if this thing was mimicking my architecture, it also had a blind spot. My early designs had a delay buffer in how they resolved system interrupts. Only milliseconds long, but enough to slip in a redirect command without being flagged. I built a redirect packet, 10 lines, clean, simple, no flourishes. Line 1, suppress external telemetry. Line 2, isolate active relay signal. Line 3, lock autopilot script. Line 4, loop sensor feed. Line 5, scramble destination parameters. Line 6, rewrite relay destination with local loop. Line 7, sever all outbound calls. Line 8, inject firewall under root. Line 9, fake authentication report. Line 10, reroute all code paths to terminal sandbox. I hit execute. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the radar came back. It blinked once, twice, and then stabilized. A soft tone confirmed restored visibility. To the pilots, everything had returned to normal. But to me, the truth was now clear and chilling. Our flight had been redirected midair, silent and invisible to everyone on board. We weren't heading to Stuttgart. We hadn't been for the past 200 miles. Instead, we were flying toward a strip of airspace on the outer edge of European radar coverage. An unmonitored pocket near the Baltic Sea. Not officially a no-fly zone, but close enough to raise questions. The plane had been scheduled to disappear there, its coordinates spoofed, its signal faked, its arrival unlogged. But the why? That still hadn't revealed itself. Until I pulled the last fragment of code from the hijack program. Buried in the shell was an outbound IP address. It wasn't military, it wasn't civilian. It was an encrypted relay node, designed to receive large packets of data through disguised flight telemetry. They weren't trying to crash the plane. They were trying to deliver something. I isolated the data tunnel and ran a reverse trace. What I found sent ice through my spine. A compressed payload, data bundles piggybacking on the telemetry stream, was being exfiltrated in real time. And the packets weren't random. They were structured like intelligence reports. Encrypted, anonymized, segmented. Meant to be reassembled on the other end by someone who knew exactly what they were receiving. Someone had embedded a full-scale data dump into the plane's communication output, sending pieces of it out over every false telemetry pulse. Piece by piece, byte by byte. The plane wasn't the target. It was the carrier. A courier in the sky. I severed the stream, injected a termination protocol. The tunnel collapsed. And for the first time in 30 minutes, the system stopped fighting back. But I didn't relax. Because now I knew the real question wasn't how it happened. It was who. Someone on this plane had embedded that payload. Someone had access, timing, intent. And someone, somewhere, had used my old work to write the delivery system. My eyes drifted toward the cabin door. There were 48 passengers on board, 47 questions left, and at least one answer waiting behind a uniform. I stayed in the cockpit longer than I needed to. The stream had been severed. The hijack command chain was dead. The plane was back under our control, but I wasn't done. Not with the system, not with the truth. I dove back into the access logs, parsing the ghost trail left behind by the code injection. There's always a trace, even when someone thinks they've wiped it clean. Especially when they're arrogant enough to think no one like me would be looking. It didn't take long. Buried beneath the sandbox, a redundant test module someone used to emulate the avionics behavior, I found a version history, a cached file stub, and inside that stub was a snippet of code no longer than 15 lines. I froze, because I recognized it. Not entirely, it wasn't mine, but it was close. The syntax, the indentation style, even the variable naming, recursive loop, iris, a pseudonym I used during early prototyping, long before Oracle became a call sign. It was there, hidden but deliberate. Whoever wrote this had studied my work. Closely, too closely. The original lines weren't public. They were proprietary to a closed access system I'd developed for signal cloaking during foreign ops. Specifically, the same mission that had later been used against me during the internal investigation 2 years ago. Back then, they accused me of tampering with secure logs, said I had overwritten file trails to protect an operative under review. I told them I hadn't touched the data. They didn't believe me. Now, looking at the lines before me, I saw why. Because whoever had done it knew my methods, knew them well enough to replicate them almost perfectly, but not perfectly enough. There was one mistake. Line 7 of the cache, called a variable using legacy syntax I had already deprecated before that mission ever occurred. I'd removed it after Istanbul. It was outdated, inefficient, but someone else had preserved it, copied it as part of a reference they didn't fully understand. That one inconsistency proved the code wasn't mine. It was mimicked, replicated, by someone who had access to my files, to my logs, to my working builds. And there was only one person I knew who had stood behind me during late nights at Langley, who had shadowed my work under the guise of reviewing my process, who had submitted the first internal complaint that led to my clearance suspension, my sister, Colonel Erica Mace. I stared at the lines again, then saved a secure copy to my drive. Not to expose her, not yet. I wasn't here to get even, but I was done being quiet. The betrayal from 2 years ago wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't overreach. It was targeted, methodical, and whoever had built the payload that nearly took down this flight had been trained by someone who knew me better than anyone else. Someone who once called me her little sister and whispered, "I wish I had your brain." Now it was clear. She didn't just envy it, she weaponized it. I ejected my drive, stood, and turned toward the cabin. The plane was calm now, restored systems, reassured crew, but the real turbulence was just beginning. Because for the first time in years, I had proof. And this time, I wasn't walking away. I found her standing by the galley, arms crossed, pretending to read a manifest she already knew by heart. She didn't look surprised to see me approach. Maybe she had felt it coming. Maybe she always knew it would. I held up the drive. "I found something," I said. She didn't reach for it. "Telemetry logs?" she asked flatly, still staring ahead. "No. Code fragments, embedded in the spoof script." That got her attention. She looked at me, not curious, defensive. I pulled out my tablet, opened the file, turned the screen so she could see it. 15 lines of code, small, clean. Deceptively simple. But to her, I knew it would be loud. "This structure," I said. "It's familiar, isn't it? Recursive loops, double mask conditions, misaligned call stack. It's how I used to write during my ShadowNet testing." She kept her mouth shut. "I deprecated line 7 syntax after Istanbul," I continued. "But someone didn't. Someone who copied my old files without knowing which parts I'd already evolved." I paused. "I know who wrote this." Silence. Then I added calmly, "You did." She flinched. For the first time, her shoulders shifted. Just a hair, but enough. "That's a heavy accusation," she said. "No," I said. "It's not an accusation, it's an observation, one that only you and I would even notice." She stepped forward, lowering her voice. "What do you want, Isabel? Revenge?" "No," I answered without hesitation. "I want to know why." Her mouth opened like she had a practice line ready, but nothing came out. Then something cracked. A vein of something unspoken surfaced. Not regret. Not yet, but something close. "Because you're better than me," she said finally. Not whispered, not shouted, just delivered. "You were better, at all of it. The coding, the systems thinking, the calm under pressure. And you didn't even realize it." I blinked. You think this is about talent. No, she said, bitterly. It's about space. It's about rooms I had to fight to enter, rooms you walked into by accident. They listened to you. They watched you work and nodded like they understood something holy. I had to claw my way through every level to get there. And when I finally did, you were already sitting at the damn table. I didn't speak, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because part of me understood. She looked away, then back at me with fire. You didn't even want it. That made it worse. You didn't chase it. You just had it. So you buried me? I asked quietly. You erased me from my own name? I didn't expect them to exile you, she snapped. I thought they'd warn you, redirect you. But then it was done, and I couldn't stop it without confessing what I'd done. And now? I asked. She stared at me. I don't know, she admitted. I thought I'd feel safer. But seeing you here, after everything, I think I was just afraid. I nodded slowly, not because it made things better, but because the truth, finally spoken, felt heavier than the lie it replaced. I'm not here to destroy you, Erica, I said. I just needed to see if you remembered what you did. She turned back toward the window, voice barely above a whisper. I never forgot. And for the first time, neither of us said a word. I hadn't thought about Syria in years. Not the mission itself, not the codes, not even the night it ended. But now, standing on a plane high above the Atlantic with Erica's silence still echoing behind me, that memory returned, clear, sharp, cold. It was a desert night, dry wind slipping through the cracks in the comms tent. The lights were dimmed to preserve the night vision filters. Outside, everything hummed. Satellites, portable servers, the distant rattle of patrol units. Inside, just me and a laptop connected to the backbone of a NATO intelligence feed that had been hijacked 6 hours prior. No one else could access it. Every command prompt came back scrambled, symbols, static, and silence. They called it a virus. They were wrong. It was an encryption monster, adaptive, recursive, and angry. The code wasn't meant to block or destroy. It was meant to test. It shifted every minute, like it was watching us try and fail. One misstep would have triggered a full wipe of our Eastern base's intel cache. Dozens of linked operations across 3 countries. Years of fieldwork, erased. That was when Redfield called me in. He didn't look angry, just tired. I need it clean, he said. 0 loss, can you do that? I didn't answer. I sat down. 5 hours later, I cracked it. Not by brute force, but by listening, watching how the code moved. It was elegant in a way only someone deeply familiar with my own style would understand. It was like seeing my own reflection, distorted. After it was over, I walked out of the tent and into the dry night. Redfield followed. He didn't say much at first, just stood next to me, arms folded, his voice as level as always. That wasn't Russian, he said. No, I answered. Chinese? No, I repeated. He paused, then asked the question that stayed with me to this day. Isabel, is there anyone else on your team who could have written that? I didn't respond immediately, because I knew exactly who could. Only one person had ever studied my code not to learn it, but to improve it. Only one person had the access, the curiosity, and the hunger to twist it into something new. And only one person had ever looked at me across a workstation and said, "You're lucky, you know. You don't have to try. You just get it." Only one person had ever looked at my talent and resented it and admired it in the same breath. So I looked at Redfield and said calmly, "There's just one person. Name?" "She's not on the roster," I said. "She's not in the field." "Then who?" I took a breath. "She's the one who used to call me little sister." He didn't press further. Maybe he saw something in my eyes. Maybe he understood what it meant to carry suspicion with no proof. Because after that night, we never spoke of it again. The threat was neutralized. The mission moved forward. And the shadow of that code, of her, was buried in a locked vault with a black tag and no record. Until now. Now the pattern had repeated itself, again, on a plane full of secrets. On a flight that never should have been altered. With Erica once more, just beyond the glass. And this time, I wasn't the one hiding. I stayed up front after the confrontation. Erica disappeared into the rear cabin. I didn't follow. There were still too many unanswered questions, too many loose threads, and one of them had teeth. The system was clean. The override sequence had been contained. But the question that burned louder than all others remained. Where was the data going? I plugged back in. Not through the pilot interface, but directly into the hardened flight relay node that processed outbound signals. Most aircraft at this level of clearance didn't broadcast raw data during flight, not unless specifically authorized through layered encryption. But the hijack code had done more than seize control. It had opened a silent stream, tucked within telemetry packets and disguised as altitude corrections. The stream was still active, not outgoing anymore, but logged, fragmented caches left behind as part of the redundant packet-splitting mechanism. It wasn't meant to be readable after transmission, but it hadn't accounted for me. I started pulling fragments, reassembling headers. At first, it looked like gibberish, binary with adaptive compression wrapped in 3 layers of obfuscation, standard for military encryption. Not unusual. What was unusual was the tag, a 4-digit marker buried deep in the compression header. 4779. I hadn't seen that code in years. It was the internal classification prefix for high-priority NATO black site caches, locations of off-the-record data vaults, secure cold servers, and digital dead drops, storage locations no one outside Joint Command was supposed to know about, places we used when we didn't want the Five Eyes watching, no civilians, no paper trail. I initiated decryption. Each layer fought back, like claws holding tight to a sealed box. But I wasn't just anyone trying to open it. I was the one who had helped build the system. Layer 1, breached. Layer 2, breached. Layer 3, slower, hardened. But I had the key. I broke it. The file opened. It wasn't just coordinates. It was a list. Rows upon rows of black site vaults. NATO data centers hidden across 6 countries, each paired with local handlers, rotating access codes, and secondary encryption tokens, intel fragments, biometric registries, operative identities, cold storage vaults, unregistered transport lanes, dossiers on compromised allies, internal dissenters, counterintelligence assets, a network map of NATO's digital spine. And someone had tried to exfiltrate it through this plane, piece by piece. I stared at the screen, stomach tightening. This wasn't just a hijack. It wasn't just a redirect. It wasn't even about crashing the plane. The payload wasn't the code. It was the data. Someone had used this flight as a courier, an airborne smuggler for the most sensitive information NATO possessed. If we hadn't stopped the transmission, the last of it would have reached its destination within minutes. Reassembled, sold, weaponized. But who? Who had access to this list? Who had authorization to even pull it? The answer was suddenly a lot more dangerous than I'd thought. Because the deeper I looked, the more I realized this wasn't just a leak. It was an inside job. And someone on this flight had tried to sell out the alliance. I shut the file and slid my laptop into a secure sleeve. The data hadn't gotten out, but it had almost made it. And I knew this kind of operation didn't run on automation alone. Someone had to initiate the transfer, manually, close to the core, with access to physical relays. Someone had been sitting close to the transmitter, possibly hiding in plain sight. So I walked back into the main cabin, calm and silent. Eyes tracked me, but no one spoke. That's when I saw him, a young sergeant, early 20s maybe, wearing a uniform that looked just slightly too new, clean-shaven, but his gaze was restless, not afraid, more like waiting for something. He was seated in the 3rd row from the front, near the emergency exit, directly behind Erica. And he wasn't doing anything suspicious, at least not openly. But his hand lingered low near the seat base, just beneath the cushion, a place no one would normally reach during flight. I pretended to adjust my seatbelt near him, then tapped into the laptop interface still live on my tablet. I activated the thermal scan overlay, crude, but enough to map heat signatures nearby. There it was, a pulsing red dot, no larger than a fist, hidden under his seat. Too hot for a phone, too compact for a laptop, but exactly right for a live link data router, the kind I used to smuggle signal intercepts back in the day. I stood upright, walked up to him. He looked up, forced a polite smile. "Everything all right, ma'am?" I didn't answer. Instead, I bent down and reached under his seat. He moved fast, faster than I expected, but I was faster. He shoved his tray table down and tried to lunge across the aisle, but I grabbed his wrist mid-motion and twisted. Not enough to break it, but enough to lock his shoulder. Passengers gasped. He thrashed, tried to reach into his boot. That's where the second transmitter was. I swept his leg, drove him down gently but firmly against the narrow aisle, and pinned him. The device under his seat vibrated once, then stopped. No explosions, no backup signal. Just a dead blink. I reached under, pulled out the transmitter, a disguised Bluetooth relay, custom-milled housing, wrapped in carbon fiber. No markings, no serials. "Got it," I said to no one in particular. The sergeant glared up at me. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied, standing slowly. He struggled again, but the flight security detail had already moved in. 2 men with restraint cuffs and absolutely no patience. As they dragged him toward the back, I scanned the crowd. Most faces were shocked. A few were scared, but one was unreadable. Erica. She hadn't moved, hadn't turned. She just stared out the window like none of it surprised her. Like the storm she'd summoned was finally moving through. And I wasn't sure if that terrified me more than the man I just tackled. I secured the relay device inside a sealed pouch and returned to the cockpit, my mind already calculating the layers of deception. The sergeant hadn't acted alone. That kind of custom hardware wasn't something you just pick up in a market. It required design access, technical clearance, and most crucially, protection. I patched into the secure satellite line and pinged Redfield's encrypted node. He answered almost immediately. His voice came through with the calm urgency I remembered from Syria. "Talk to me, Oracle." I intercepted a Bluetooth uplink relay embedded under a seat, I said. "Active channel, military grade, and we have a courier. Young sergeant, uniform checks out. Too clean, though." "Where is he now?" "Restrained, isolated." I paused. "There's more. I'm listening." The relay was slave to an onboard exploit. Not for crashing the system, just rerouting it. It disguised outbound data inside flight telemetry. The transmission didn't just go to a black site. It contained access points, names, coordinates, NATO vault locations. Someone tried to walk our deepest assets out of the sky. There was a short silence on the other end. Then Redfield's voice dropped an octave. "Then the payload wasn't the code." "No," I said. "It was him." The young soldier hadn't just facilitated the leak, he was the leak. A breathing, moving courier. The relay was only the trigger. The encrypted package inside him, on a wearable, maybe subdermal, maybe cloaked behind biometric firewalls, was the real prize. Redfield exhaled. Damn it. We were looking at this all wrong. My voice dropped to a whisper. "Sir, how did he make it on this flight?" There were 5 layers of vetting. Clearance required a NATO Tier 3 pass. That's hard even for me to obtain. "He couldn't have done it alone," Redfield said. "He had help." We both already knew who that help might be. I didn't want to say it. He didn't wait for me to. "Colonel Erica Mace," Redfield said, flatly. The name dropped like steel. I felt the air go still. She was the senior officer responsible for the manifest. She signed off on every passenger, and she authorized a last-minute override for a non-rostered technician. He was supposed to be part of the IT redundancy audit team. I stared at the screen. Cold spread through my hands. She vouched for him. Yes. Did anyone verify his credentials? His file was verified, through her office. No cross-check. We didn't question it. Why would we? Because she was clean, respected, decorated, efficient. Because she was one of us. I took a slow breath. "Sir, this isn't just treason. This is strategic betrayal. That boy had keys we haven't even fully declassified yet." "I know." "So what now?" "We land," Redfield said. "And then we handle it. Quietly. With precision." I looked toward the rear of the plane. Erica was still seated. Calm, still, the eye of her own storm. "She's my sister," I said quietly. "She was your sister," Redfield replied, with the same precision he used in Syria. "Now she's something else." The line went dead, and I was left staring at the truth I had feared all along. The virus wasn't in the system. It had always been in the blood. The hum of the engines faded into a steady backdrop as I stood in the auxiliary control bay, a place no one used unless they were trying to speak in private. Erica was already there, leaning against the panel, arms crossed, not in defiance, but in resignation. She didn't look at me when I entered, but I felt the shift in the air, the heaviness of truth pressing against walls long held up by silence. "I knew you'd come," she said. I didn't respond. She turned toward me, her face unreadable, but no longer guarded. "There was a time," she began, "when I thought you were just lucky, that all your brilliance came without effort, that they respected you because they saw something in you that they refused to see in me." I listened. I waited. This wasn't a conversation. It was a reckoning. "I pushed harder," she continued, "worked longer, took roles I didn't want, just to climb. And I climbed, Isabel, but I was always chasing you, even when you weren't trying to lead." Her voice didn't crack. Her eyes didn't redden, but I knew. Then she said it. "The first time I realized you were better than me was the first time I truly hated you." I exhaled, slow. "I never wanted to compete." "I know," she whispered. "That made it worse." She stepped closer. "When that code surfaced in Syria, I recognized your pattern. I knew it wasn't you. But I said nothing. Because if you fell, then maybe I could finally stand." I stared at her. All those years, all those silences. She finally looked up at me. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to hear it from me before anyone else writes it in a file." She turned back toward the panel. I didn't say, "I forgive you," but I didn't walk away either, and maybe, for that moment, it was enough. I returned to my seat and opened my laptop again. The main threat was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something remained, dormant, waiting. So I looked deeper, and I found it. Buried in the code architecture, past the decoy relay and beneath the data exfil routines, there was a secondary trigger. Time-based. Not designed to transmit, designed to destroy. If the payload wasn't successfully offloaded within 6 hours of activation, the system would wipe itself. Redundant logs, backups, internal routing, all of it. Gone. A failsafe. Whoever wrote this didn't want to trace if they failed. I checked the clock. We were 4 hours and 37 minutes in. Then I saw something else. An access log. It didn't come from the hijacker. It didn't originate from the cockpit. It came from my own laptop. I froze, scrolled, confirmed. The backup had auto-triggered when I intercepted the data mid-flight. My system, pre-configured with emergency logging protocols I'd built years ago, had done what it was designed to do: protect the truth, no matter the source. Without knowing it, I had created the final copy, the only one. I sat back. It wasn't just about stopping the breach anymore. Now it was about what to do with the one piece that remained. The part everyone thought was gone. I stared at the screen, heart steady, hands still. And I made my decision. I met Redfield again, this time via secure uplink from the captain's comm station. He looked older, or maybe I did. He didn't say hello, just nodded. "Did we lose everything?" "No," I said. "I have it. Full archive, uncorrupted." He exhaled, then leaned forward. "Send it." "I will," I said. "But on one condition." He raised a brow. "Go on." "I don't want reinstatement," I said. "No commendations, no headlines. I don't even want the name Oracle back." He was silent. "I want my name cleared," I continued. "Every accusation from Syria, wiped. No sealed note, no asterisk, just gone." Redfield nodded slowly. "And," I looked him straight through the screen, "I don't want Erica to take the fall, at least not solely. She wasn't working alone. This op was too clean, too layered. Someone else inside enabled it. I want a full investigation. Quiet, internal, no scapegoats." He studied me. "You're protecting her." "No," I said. "I'm just not condemning her. That's different." He nodded again. "Done." I transmitted the file. 23 seconds later, the confirmation pinged. He looked at me one last time. "You did the right thing." "No," I said. "I did the necessary thing." The screen went black. I sat there, hands in my lap, watching the sea of clouds outside the cockpit. Erica would be flagged, investigated. Not because I named her, but because the system, now fully restored, would do what it always should have done: recognize the signs, trace the codes, and follow the chain to its source. I didn't need to testify. The truth was already programmed to speak. And for the first time in years, I felt free. We landed just after 0200 local time. The runway was quiet, slick with rain that hadn't quite left. No civilians, no lights beyond the flood lamps aimed low and tight. It wasn't a welcoming committee. It was containment. As the wheels touched down, I watched from the side window. Black SUVs lined in perfect symmetry. Armed officers in discreet tactical gear waited at each exit point. Faces blank, movements rehearsed. No one on board spoke. The intercom didn't announce our arrival. The silence had weight. When the doors opened, they boarded with precision. No shouting, no guns raised. They were professionals, internal affairs, I guessed. NATO's own version of janitors, clean-cut, invisible until necessary. They moved directly to the back, where the detained sergeant had been kept. He didn't resist, didn't speak. They led him away like luggage. Hands behind his back, head straight, not a single glance behind. Then they approached Erica. She didn't look up from her seat. The lead agent said her name softly, but she heard it like a verdict. She rose, didn't argue, didn't ask questions, but they didn't cuff her. She wasn't under arrest, just subject to preliminary debriefing. They escorted her out, flanked but not restrained. Her uniform was still crisp, her shoulders still squared. She hadn't lost her composure, but something had shifted. I could feel it. I waited until everyone else had disembarked. No one looked back. I wasn't surprised. No one ever thanks the one who stops the fire before it burns the house down. I gathered my laptop, closed the metal case with a soft click, and stepped out into the damp morning. No one waited for me, and I preferred it that way. That night, I sat alone in a borrowed apartment above a small bakery in Stuttgart. The city buzzed faintly below, trams echoing against stone, distant voices chasing the tail end of midnight. I didn't unpack, didn't eat, just opened my laptop and watched the encrypted logs trickle in. Debriefings, internal memos, automated alerts confirming what I already knew. The system had started its audit. Names were being flagged, connections drawn. Erica wasn't the only one in the spotlight anymore. My clearance hadn't been reinstated, but my access pathways remained. Old keys still opened quiet doors, and I walked through them one last time. Then my personal device buzzed. One message, from Erica. Simple, direct, no signature. You won. You deserve to. I read it once, then again. The words didn't feel sharp. They weren't poisoned. They felt tired, not defeated, just worn. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew too well. Some wounds don't need to be dressed with conversation. Some truths don't need to echo in return. I opened my encrypted journal, the one I kept hidden even from myself some days, and I typed, "Forgiveness doesn't require them to ask, but it has to be real enough for you to let go." I stared at that line for a long time, not because it made me feel better, but because it reminded me that letting go wasn't weakness. It was proof I had survived. The mission was over, the reckoning had passed, and I didn't need to be Oracle anymore. Isabel Mace was enough. It was a Tuesday, one of those spring days where the sky over Frankfurt was soft with cloud but stubbornly bright beneath. I boarded a commercial flight to DC. No orders, no mission, no protocol. Just a woman with a backpack and a boarding pass that read Seat 9A. I took my place, window seat, middle of the aircraft. The same row, the same view. But this time, no one looked twice. No uniforms followed me on board. No sister casting long shadows down the aisle. Just civilians, reading magazines, scrolling phones, sipping coffee that was too hot for the air conditioning. And me, not Oracle. Not the cautionary tale from a redacted report, just Isabel. I didn't bring a laptop this time, no terminal to guard, no network to rescue. My hands rested quietly in my lap, palms warm from holding nothing at all. The flight crew moved up and down the aisle with that familiar pre-takeoff rhythm, smiling politely, announcing safety procedures everyone would forget. Then, as the passengers settled in, someone walked past me slowly. A man, maybe late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of stance you pick up from decades in special service. He didn't stop, didn't linger. But just as he passed my row, he looked down, briefly, and whispered, "Valkyrie 1." My eyes met his, just for a second. I said nothing, just nodded, and smiled. He didn't need confirmation, he already knew. He moved on, found his seat, never looked back, and I returned to the window. Outside, the tarmac gleamed faintly under a gray sky. Somewhere in a classified vault, my name had been cleared. Somewhere deeper still, the audit was unearthing names that didn't belong in uniform. I didn't need to be part of that cleanup. My role had ended. I never wanted a medal. I never asked for redemption. But I had reclaimed something they tried to take, without ceremony, without apology, the truth. And that would always be mine. So now when people say, "She's just a keyboard warrior," I let them. Because I know what 10 lines of code can do. I know what silence can dismantle. And I know that justice doesn't always arrive with handcuffs or headlines. Sometimes it comes on quiet flights, in anonymous seats, whispered only between those who carry the same ghosts. So before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.